Hello, this is Billy Joyce, and I have another episode of our winemaking series. And today we have Simon Roberts from Ridgeview Sparkling Wines from England, from Sussex County. And I'd like to welcome Simon. Welcome, Simon.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it. So, Simon, you and your family have been making sparkling wine in the southern part of England for how many years now?
This is our 25th year, so our 25th anniversary.
Wow, that's right.
So
now,
our first vines were planted 25 years ago next month.
Oh wow, that is excellent. And can you tell us a bit about the history of your winery and your vineyards and about Ridgeview?
So my parents had a software company which they sold and wanted a new project to start. My dad had always been, he'd always seen what was going to be the next fashionable thing. I mean, he went into computers before there were home PCs. By the time he sold his company, nearly every household had a PC. So he was always at the forefront of the next industry. And there was a little bit of buzz about English sparkling or English wine, and they loved wine. In fact, they were looking at maybe possibly buying somewhere in France, and then what went on to become the Ridgeview estate came on the market. So they bought that and decided to only make sparkling wine. So originally the project was going to be, they were going to make 20,000 bottles a year and just sell that locally to farmers markets and things like that. I joined rather begrudgingly for that summer. I just finished uni studying something completely different. And I was only going to help out for the summer and then fell in love with grape growing. So I stayed to look after the vineyards. And then we slowly started to get bigger and bigger. And the 2019 harvest, we will bottle just over 450,000 bottles. So in 25 years, we've gone from 20,000 bottles to our projected forecast for 2025 is about 600,000 to 700,000 bottles.
That's amazing.
So when we started, there was one other producer that was specializing just in sparkling wine, and then we planted 2 years later. And then at that point, English wine was not very well regarded. There was a lot of varieties that had come over from Germany because most of the knowledge had come from Geisenheim, and they just transposed what they were doing there to the UK, and it didn't really work. So I think us and other producers that were planting sort of champagne varieties, they're our nearest neighbour, and it seemed to really suit that style of winemaking, our climate and our soil. So that's all we do. We only make sparkling wine with those Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier.
And so your father, not coming originally from the winemaking arena, did he have some consultants and to check out the soil and say, hey, this is what is probably the best thing for you to do?
Yeah, we certainly, obviously they spoke to people. Back in the day, there was sort of really two people that you would speak to if you wanted to get into the English wine industry. One was Stephen Skelton, who's an MW and is very much still very part of the industry. And the other person was Kit Lindler, who in his time was probably the head winemaker for at the time most of the big producers. And we ended up buying his winery in Kent and bringing all the equipment back here, but also he was our mentor for the first 2 years. So we learnt under him.
Excellent. So can you tell us about your wines that are available in the US?
So within our core group, we have several non-vintage wines. So in the US, we have Bloomsbury, which is probably our biggest blend by a long way. Very much Chardonnay dominant, still with Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. So we make it very much in the style of an aperitif. So it's very fresh. There's lots of citrus there, very effervescent, very easy drinking. We have our Blanc de Noirs, which is a vintage, which is just Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, Pinot Noir dominant, which is a very much richer, fuller style, very much more of a food wine. And then we have our rosé, which is unusually for a rosé is Chardonnay dominant. So it's about 70% Chardonnay, a little bit of Pinot Noir, and a tiny bit of Pinot Meunier. And then we have our Blanc de Blanc, which is obviously 100% Chardonnay.
Which is, pardon me?
Which is 100% Chardonnay.
Okay. What about Cavendish?
Oh, sorry, yeah, Cavendish. So Cavendish is very much a traditional blend. So it's a third Chardonnay, third Pinot Noir, third Pinot Meunier. And that's it's very rounded. It's again easy drinking, but it's also a very easy food match. We find that because of the balance of the three varieties, it goes very well with Asian foods. There's a lot of sweetness, there's a lot of savouriness, but there's also that acidity as well. So it's sort of like sweet and sour, but it's also quite a complex wine. It works really well with the off trade.
Yeah, that was the last one I drank. Was the Cavendish. It was delicious. Like, obviously, the only one I'm not familiar with is the Blanc de Noir. Is that more limited?
It is. So so we only sent, I think, maybe 2,000 bottles of the Blanc de Noir. So it was very small volume. But so I think at the moment you're on the 2013. Domestically in the UK, we've just moved on to the 2015.
And how long have you been selling wine into the United States? It seemed to me a little while ago, when I first started in the MW program, and English wine actually was on the exam. That meant, okay, it's all over the place now. But it was very difficult to get a bottle anyplace. So how long have you been, it seems much more available now.
So when we first started exporting to the US, we originally we didn't realize how the US works properly. So we'd gone in with an East Coast distributor, and then an expat, so an English guy who was based in Virginia. So he was working as a go-between for us, but it wasn't really working. So we had good representation on the East Coast, especially in New York. But outside that, it was really hard work. So either me or tomorrow my sister were having to come out. So Tam was coming out maybe 6 or 7 times a year just to keep pushing it. And it was really hard work. So when we went with Banville, who are now our national distributor, and then since we've been with them, obviously it's much easier. So then we've been with them with 2.5 years, so which is why you've seen such a bigger pickup.
Are you exporting to China or Japan or any of the Asian markets?
Yeah, so I mean, in total we export to 13 different countries. We've only really just gone into China, so it's only probably the first 8 months. Hong Kong's been quite strong for us. We've been in Hong Kong for about 2 years, and then other Asian markets is the Philippines, Taiwan, and Japan. We've just moved to a new distributor, so we've started to see a bit more of a pickup. We were originally with this a small wine distributor in Tokyo, so it was quite limited volumes. Whereas now we've moved to a bigger distributor, we're seeing a bit more of a pickup. But Taiwan has been a real surprise market, actually. That's proven to be really good.
I will have to tell my nephew because he's been living there for about 11 years. So.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yeah. Whatever you want to call global warming or climate change, obviously England is now definitely a spot for growing cool climate grapes, much like parts of Canada. But obviously you still have challenges. So what are some of the challenges in the vineyard that you face?
So, I mean, the biggest impact I think we've seen from global warming is the seasons have changed. So we've really only got 25 years worth of history. So in the bigger picture, that's not very much data. But when we first started, winter was very much end of November, December, January, February, and most of March. I mean, winter now really doesn't start till January, and spring starts at the end of February. So you've seen that side of it change. It means that we've got quite limited time for the vines to really hibernate, to take all that energy down into the root system. So that's the first issue. Then frost is a really big, so we're in the middle of frost watch at the moment. So we're getting much warmer than usual days, but it's the temperature drop in the evening is still massive. So, I mean, we had a frost Sunday, even though during the day we had 17, 18 degrees. So frost is a big issue. And then flowering is another time. So obviously vines being self-pollinating, for flowering, they need really warm, dry weather. And historically, our flowering always timed with Wimbledon fortnight, which meant you could guarantee it was always raining. So for the last couple of years, they moved the Wimbledon fortnight, but obviously our flowering hadn't changed. So the last 2 years, we've had virtually perfect flowering. So not that I believe in those sort of things, but it's very coincidental. And then the biggest challenge is rain, really. Either we've got too much rain, or we have really long periods of no rain, which in England, as you know, is quite unusual. But we've had 2 summers now. We have virtually no rain for 3 or 4 months. And then last year it started raining at the end of September. Luckily, we'd nearly finished harvest. It didn't really stop until end of January. I mean, it nearly rained every day. It was, so there's that challenge. So the soils get waterlogged. It's not quite bordering on damaging the root system, but it wasn't far off it, I must admit.
So when do you harvest?
So when we started, you could almost, I mean, if you read textbooks, halfway through flowering is supposed to be 100 days until you start picking. But almost always, no matter when we had flowering, when bud burst was, we would nearly always start in the second week of October. For about 15 years, that was, you could almost guarantee it. And then probably over the last 5 years, we've seen that creep earlier and earlier. So the last 2 years, we've started looking at mid-September to start harvest.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Big change.
Massive.
Like, are there any challenges you face in the winery and actually commercially, obviously?
In the winery, challenges. I mean, grapes is our biggest challenge. We just don't have enough. We never have enough grapes. Because our industry is still so young, demand is really high. I mean, so what we're pressing in October, even though that won't be for sale for 2-3 years, we pretty much know where that's going to go. We don't really have any volumes for growth, which is our biggest issue. I mean, we're going through a rapid expansion plan at the moment. We're doubling production over 5 years, but as soon as we agree to another growing contract, we get another client. So that's another 20,000 bottles here, another 50,000 bottles there. So it's really difficult to keep up with demand at the moment, which is a good challenge to have.
Yes. So talking about that, do you have the ability to put some reserve wines away? Do you have some reserve wine to blend with?
Yeah, I mean, it's moving to non-vintage and to reserve wines has been something we've been trying to do for about 15 years. But again, to keep the momentum with the sales going, that was really difficult. So it probably took us a good 8 years to build up any commercial volume of reserve. So at the moment, we're working on about 30,000 litre reserve system. So we use half of it, replace half of it. And we're hoping that by 2025, we can sort of build that up to maybe between 50 and 60,000 litres.
Can you tell us a little bit about how long your different wines stay on the lees? Because these are all traditionally made wines, correct?
That's it, yeah. So everything is very much traditional. So it's all second fermentation in the bottle. We're one of the few wineries that actually has dedicated underground cellars that don't require any temperature control. So there is a little bit of temperature fluctuation, but it's quite minimal. So our non-vintage wines generally tend to age between 18 months and 2 years on lees. Probably at the moment airing more on 18 months. And then our limited releases, so our Rose de Noir, our Blanc de Noir, and our Blanc de Blanc have a minimum. We will not even look at releasing them until they've had a minimum of 3 years on lees. And so, to be honest, the age of a vintage release is about 18 months. So we're trying to eke that out a little bit longer, so maybe 4 years. But at the moment, it's 3. And Magnums is a minimum of 10 years.
Oh, What do you offer in Magnum?
So most years we'll do our Blanc de Blanc in Magnums. We've done a couple of years as our Rose de Noir. And we've just started this year, so our Bloomsbury, which is on our non-vintage, we're going to start doing those in Magnums as well. They won't be aged for 10 years. They will be a lot less. But yeah, the Blanc de Blanc is minimum of 10 years.
That's interesting. And what about commercially? What is one of your most challenging things? Is it hard? Well, you intimated that it's actually not hard to sell your wine. So,
no, I mean, it's not hard. I mean, we work with a national distributor in the UK, so it's very much they're helping us push that message across. But a lot of people that you speak to that will say, you know, they have a real interest in wine and they're really knowledgeable about wine. They don't even realise that there is an English wine industry. You know, they might not have even tasted English wine, so it's really educating people to know that there is an English wine and how to drink that wine and when to drink that wine. The problem with sparkling wine is that a lot of people associate it with celebrations and weddings, and you know, they only see it as that type of wine. And what we do a lot of work with is working with restaurants to show people that actually sparkling wine is a really good food wine, and it matches with a great variety of different dishes. And that's one of the best parts outside the winemaking that I enjoy, is that we do a lot of Ridgeview dinners at restaurants. So not only are you showing people that there is an English wine industry, but most of them have never had a whole dinner with different sparkling wines. And that part of it they love, because it's a really interesting. They don't think it's going to work, and suddenly by the second course, oh, this is interesting. And by the end of the meal, they're like, oh my God, I'm only ever going to drink sparkling wine with dinner forever. And I love that. It's really interesting. It's really good fun.
I love sparkling wine. It's one of my favorite beverages. And there can be so much complexity to it, as you mentioned, and with food wines. Your Fitzrovia Rosé, to me, is also such an amazing wine with any kind of grilled salmon. Is there a favorite pairing with any of your wines?
One pairing it might not be the perfect match, but I really like it because it's so, you wouldn't think of it, but our Blanc de Noir, it goes really well with a beetroot tartare. But my mum did a dish a couple of Christmases ago where it was a slow roasted lamb shoulder with pomegranate and mint leaves, and it worked so well. So you had the acidity of the Blanc de Noir cut through the fat of the lamb, but the freshness of the pomegranate matched with the sort of the black cherries in the Blanc de Noir, and the mint leaves sort of matched really well with that licorice on the back palate of the wine. And it was just you wouldn't think of having a sparkling wine with roast lamb, but it actually worked really well.
Oh, I believe it. I always say sparkling wine goes with everything.
Definitely.
The peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
And peanut butter and jelly goes with everything, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and here in Nashville, hot chicken is also something that.
Oh yeah.
Next time you come, you'll have to try to do a pairing someplace with some hot chicken, because that would definitely increase the consumption in Nashville. Tell me about Ridgeview's memorable moments. I believe that Ridgeview is poured for the Queen, or was poured for the Queen at some point.
Yeah, so we've been very fortunate. We've been poured at several royal events, but the first was probably Barack Obama's first state visit, and for the banquet they actually toasted Barack Obama with our Fitzrovia, with our rosé. So that was super amazing. We only found out because my brother-in-law's father, who was actually in the States at the time, he saw an article about it and messaged, said, oh my goodness, they're drinking your wine. So that was amazing. And then for the Diamond Jubilee, where we used it at several events, being served at any royal event is always really special. That's a great moment.
You were in the International Wine, the Winery of the Year a couple of years ago, weren't you?
Yeah, so that was an amazing moment. So the International Wine and Spirits competition is the oldest wine competition in the world. I think it's now in its fifth decade. And my father always held it in the most esteem. For him, it was the most important competition. and we won Best Sparkling Wine 3 times over the last 15 years. And then it was the anniversary of my father's passing, was the night of the banquet in 2018. And so we'd won Best English Wine for a wine we make for Marks and Spencer's. And the whole evening is amazing. There's a lot of pomp and ceremony, and it's in a very old building, and probably one of the best wine tastings. So before the wine competition, you all go down into the crypt underneath the building, and there must be all the award-winning wines are there. So it's a great opportunity, but it's a great atmosphere. Anyway, and then so that night we were all so excited. We were so busy realizing that we'd been shortlisted for International Winemaker of the Year. We didn't actually hear when they said, "Oh, Ridgeview are the winners." So we were in shock. But that was a really great night. It was really good.
That had to be really special. This is 2020, and this is the year of COVID-19, and all of us in the entire world are obviously affected and feeling isolated and yet connected in different ways, but so many people are not working. How is this affecting Ridgeview, England in general, yourselves?
I think England as a whole, it's massive. I mean, nothing's happened like this in my generation, so there's not really anywhere to look at how to deal with it. But I think people in general are dealing with it really well. I mean, obviously, some are struggling more than others. The isolation and the lockdown is really difficult. On the way to work, you can see there's probably people that are out that shouldn't be out, but it's very, very few. And I think we appreciate that we need to do this to get life back to normal as quickly as possible. And I think the majority of the population think that. For Ridgeview, it's been massive. I mean, restaurants, bars, shops, all closed overnight. We lost 75% of our income overnight for the year. It's like, it was massive. I mean, we're very lucky that 40% of our business is contract winemaking. So at the moment, DEFRA, which is our Department of Agriculture, decided that vineyards and wineries are part of the key services or key industry, so we could continue to still produce. So we furloughed 70% of our staff. We've got key staff in the winery, so we can actually still bottle. So we've still got that income coming in from contract bottling, which I think hopefully means that we will still have a business in 6 months' time. Whereas a lot of English wineries don't have their own bottling line, so they get contractors in to do it, which most of those are in France, so they can't come over. So at the moment, probably, I don't know, there's hundreds of wineries in England that will not get wine bottled before the next harvest. So what they're going to do, I'm not sure. I mean, once we've bottled everything we have, if we can bottle for other people, we will before harvest, but I don't know for how many that will be, or if we can. But the English or the British are very good at adapting and making things work. So hopefully, we'll get through this and the best we can and come out the other side and try and get back to what was normal as quickly as possible.
That is really interesting. So just to be clear then, so restaurants are not allowed to make and deliver food, or?
They can, but a lot aren't set up, especially in the cities. A lot of restaurants are quite small. There are a few restaurants that are now diversifying into doing deliveries, or you can get takeout, but it's not a lot of them. A lot of them don't have a license to do off sales, so that doesn't help them, or doesn't help us in that respect. But to be honest, a lot of people, they're not even going out to get takeout. They're not going outside at all. If they do, they might venture to the supermarket. But so if you live somewhere that you don't get delivery service, which is a lot of England, because obviously it's a lot of villages and small towns, then restaurants are literally shut down.
And obviously the English government decided if the winemakers, the wine industry was important. Here, for example, there being in a city, there are a lot of restaurants that closed, but the laws usually say that restaurants cannot deliver wine, but there's been executive orders allowed for restaurants to be able to deliver wine. And retail wine and spirits is an essential service here. Now, obviously there's probably, different reasons for that. Part of it is, alcoholism. Part of it is that extra stress on everything. And then also part of it is simply there's so much money going out for unemployment and everything else. And alcohol is a heavily taxed product, definitely here. And is that part of what is going on there too? Is that part of the tax system? Is that why winemaking is probably partly allowed, because of the cost to the country? Cost to the government?
Partly, I think also more for the fact is that the Wine and Spirits Trade Association, which is our sort of like our lobbying group, they're our main point of contact to the government, has a very very effective and very outspoken CEO who is a great champion of English wine. So he's done a really good job, I think, actually. And also DEFRA acknowledged that English wine industry is a very new and up and coming industry that needs to be supported. So I think that's really helped as well. But they see it as part of agriculture, and agriculture is a key service or a key industry and needs to keep working. So, and we fall under that category. So they've put wineries under the agricultural banner, which for us has worked out really well.
That's excellent. So do you see a bigger, what do you hope comes out of this experience globally? Do you have any Pollyanna views that might come out of this on a global scale?
I just, I'm a strong believer that you need to take a silver lining out of everything. You've got to take something good out of something bad. And for me, what's been really good is that, this is, even though we've still been able to carry on working and things, we're at home a lot more. So you've got a lot more time. So we've spent it with family, but it's meant catching up with friends literally all over the world. We've been Skyping and Zooming and it's been just stopping. Do you know what I mean? Just stopping and spending time to talk to people, and not about business and not about wine, but just about stuff, and about each other. And you don't do that enough, or I don't do that enough. And I hope that, and I've got friends all over that, they've found the same sort of experiences. And it's just making sure that even after all this is over, is that we still take time to stop and just reflect on what we've got around us, what's important to us, and spending time appreciating those things rather than constantly rushing 100 miles an hour doing 50 different things at once. Every now and then it's been important to reconnect with some people that you've just not spoken to for years, just because you're just too busy. And so, but then on a sort of a more serious note, I suppose, this has shown us how we do not need to travel for work as much as we do. We've still managed to function doing a lot of work online. So environmentally, there's a lot of business travel that arguably doesn't need to be done. So I hope this sort of it carries on to a certain extent. I mean, you can't beat human interaction face to face, but this is a good substitute for things that don't really need to fly halfway around the world for. But I don't know. Yeah, I hope all the good things that have come out of this, I hope that we keep with us.
So we are going to wrap this up, let you get on with your evening because it's several hours later there. But I always have one question that I like to ask at the end of the interview, and that is, what is your most memorable wine experience outside of your own wine or British wine in general?
That is a very easy question. Okay. So when we first started Ridgeview, I didn't even drink wine. I didn't really know much about it. So I very much learned while working at the winery and talking to other people and reading about things and going to different classes. And then the very first overseas sales trip I did on my own was to Hong Kong. And we're at this noodle restaurant, and the different buyers all said, oh, they all had to bring something that they really liked. And, and I hadn't even really tasted a lot of Californian wines back then either, particularly. And we had Au Pinot Noir. And it was the first time I ever really, truly connected with a wine and probably the winemaker, because I really felt I understood what he was trying to do, what an amazing wine it was. And just ever since then, I've been in love with Au Clement. It's definitely one of my favourite wines.
Was Jim there?
He wasn't, unfortunately. But yeah, that would have been amazing. I'd love to have met him, actually. Yeah.
I have met him one time. He's quite a character for sure.
I've heard.
Very passionate. Very passionate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent wines. Well, that's wonderful. So, well, thank you very much for
You're very
your
welcome.
time. And we will be checking back in on you in hopefully in a few months to find out what else is going on. And we really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
You're welcome. Take care. Stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.